It's much worse now than when I was last here to play rugby in the 90s. And as we roll into Nuevo Laredo, I wonder what we'll find in the, quote, magic land at the end of the road, unquote. Now we're inching along stoplight to stoplight on the road to Monterey. Keith says the nightclub and bar business in Nuevo Laredo has all but shut down because of the violence perpetrated by the drug cartels, which run just about everything and operate brazenly in the midst of Mexico's general culture. It's not astronomical by American standards, says Bongo, of the local murder rate, but they do it in broad daylight, bang, 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 old-fashioned shootouts. The nicest structure in town is a giant cemetery behind pink stucco walls, occupied by 1,000 statues of Jesus to 3/4 scale, standing over the vaults with outstretched arms. A small personalized Christ for the myriad lost souls of Nuevo Laredo. And our mad journey deep into the country begins with a dirge as a funeral procession goes winding around an interior road. Keith speculates that the black-clad mourners are grieving over another drug cartel victim. A pound of very good marijuana is $100 over here, he says, but when they make a bust on the U.S. side, they value that pound at $1,000. It used to be only $500, but if they get lucky and stumble over a bunch of smugglers, it sounds more impressive to say you seized $2 million worth of pot than $1 million. One thing's for sure, the junkyards of Nuevo Laredo are legion. Just beyond a sign that says Yonke in huge crooked black letters are more ruined cars than Queens's earnest automobile boneyards ever thought of. Cars without title or name. Imponderable hulks that once ferried the skeletons of men, women, and children long buried under the stone statues of diminutive Jesus. Their ashtrays filled with the dust of hands that held the dust of cigarette ash year upon years ago. Mexico seems like nothing more than the tired, overwrought junkyard of America, protected for all eternity by the Lamb of God. As I ride along the dusty highway, it strikes me that I could produce a pretty comprehensive documentary film of my trips across the U.S. by compiling all the surveillance videos I've wandered into. Parking lots, hotel lobbies, restaurant waiting areas, ATMs, highway off-ramps, and street corners have become the new Hollywood studios of America, generating innumerable cinematic epics of la comedy humaine by the hour. This is the fulfillment of Ken Kesey's prophecy during the Merry Prankster's journey across America that one day we'll all be stars in a great movie that depicts each and every person's tiniest thought and movement. Somewhere among the uniformed personnel monitoring all this footage is the next Erich von Stroheim, the next Bertolt Brecht, a dime store auteur who will mold this raw material into a heartbreaking film that will resolve once and for all what we're doing to one another on this planet. Not so Mexico. When you cross the border here, you fall off the grid. Even in Nuevo Laredo, so close to the American side, there's the sense that your most grievous sins will be ignored rather than forgiven. It's hard to describe exactly, but it's like a place with no adult supervision. Rolling onto the plain beyond the last crumbling house and headstone, an old tune by Tom T. Hall is playing in my head. Faster horses, younger women, older whiskey, and more money. Bongo was right. What happens in Mexico stays in Mexico. That was the beginning of the trip into Mexico. At one point when I got back and I turned in the manuscript, I had a 22-year-old editorial assistant in New York who just didn't know from Shino, as my dad would say. And he said, I think the thing that's missing in the book is you need to tell us how these trips changed you. How they change you, like the hero in a novel somehow gets changed by his journey. So I was describing it to one of my other friends as we were taking one of the final trips. I said, yeah, I talked to this dipshit in New York who said, you got to show us how you changed. And I said, and my buddy said, what? I go, at this point, I don't think I'm changing that much. I said, I actually went on this trip so I could stay the way I am. not so I could change into something else. I wanted to reconnect with my youthful idealism and optimism about traveling and about the American road. So doing this trip has allowed me to maintain my faith in American people. By visiting the small towns of America, I actually met people very similar to the people that Kerouac describes in the 1940s and on the road. It actually reinforced my sense of who I am, that I'm a guy from a small town who connects with people on a basic blue-collar level. And my buddy, who's a very interesting guy, the guy that was with me on 3 of the trips, he's an ex-Marine, former Marine. He works for NASA in the space program. He's actually about ready to leave there and get his PhD in ocean engineering. He's a triathlete. He's an ex-military guy. He's a rugby player, and he's a surfer. He's a very interesting guy. And after I told him what this guy in New York told me, and we were driving for thousands of miles across the country, so we would talk, and then there would be long silences, like we just listened to the radio, because we've known each other for years. And he went, "It ain't about change, man. It's about the road." And I said, "Exactly. That's exactly right." So when people say, "Why did you take the trips?" I was like, "Because I could. Why else would you go anywhere? Really?" Somebody was going to pay for it and tell me to write about it. So I was like, when do I go? How do I sign up for that? So it was a lot of fun. That was the main reason why I do anything. And I was actually talking to Helena before, and I said, she said, "Your books are very diverse." So one of the things that has prevented me from having like a career where I would be on TV talking about my books is I didn't develop like a bunch of detective books with all the same characters, and you build your audience and it keeps getting bigger and you become, I've actually been able to write a totally separate book about each of the things that I'm interested in the order that they present themselves to me, which to me is like what I dreamed about doing when I decided to do this for work. That I would just systematically write a story about the things that I was interested in writing stories about. So it's not the most commercial way to be successful. Because say the people that like your hockey book, they want another hockey book. And I was like, all right, I wrote my hockey book, and now I'm writing a book about 1950s and 60s law enforcement, the good guys versus the bad guys in Revere Beach. And they were like, wow, that book did 2 months on the Boston Globe bestseller list, and they were like, write another true crime book like Dennis Lehane. And I was like, that's what I had to say about that subject. I've done that. And I wrote a book about Lawrence, the history of Lawrence, a novel, City and Amber. We were discussing it before, and they were like, that's your niche. Like, write a historical novel about Boston. That's what people are buying, Boston novels. Like, I didn't grow up in Boston. I lived kind of near there, but I know Lawrence. That's where I grew up. So then when I did a Kerouac book, they were like, now write a book about Ken Kesey. I was like, I don't really have a book's worth of stuff to say about Ken Kesey. I did my book about Kerouac, so now I'm going to do something else. So it's kind of fun, but it's not, you know, the best business plan, I guess. Any questions or comments?
Well, I'm amazed at your description of Mexico and Mexico City. That's the way it is now, so violent, so scary.
It's scary. I wouldn't, you know, tell like my students to, because all my students are young kids at Boston University. They're like, this sounds like a great trip. The 2 female students, they want to like hitchhike down to Mexico. I go, we're out of your mind. I'm going to call your mother right now. Do that. I mean, for me, I didn't feel in any imminent physical danger, but I was with somebody that really knew what he was doing. As it turns out, we have some really interesting encounters. I mean, if we had more time, I'd read like a short scene about people we met there. The people were very nice. The actual working Mexican person is just like us, trying to make a living, and like likes to have a good meal and share a joke and drink a beer and have a cup of coffee in the morning. But because their criminals are so powerful, you are you know, you are taking a risk when you go outside of the resort areas. Most of the resort areas have private security. If you've ever gone on a vacation to some of these places like,
But even Cancun now, they say it's not as safe.
if you stay inside like the fenced-in part where you paid all this money and they feed you and you have the beach and all that, you're pretty safe. If you go into town, you get separated from people, and you're on your own for a few minutes, like, you know, you're vulnerable to regular, ordinary street criminals, just like you would be if you wandered through Kenmore Square at 3 o'clock in the morning. But, you know, the drug cartels just don't have any respect for human life, so if they wanted to kill somebody that was in the same restaurant you were in, you would get killed. And you see it every day in the news. Chances are, if we all took a trip down there separately in the next year, not one of us would even have a flat tire, just because of the odds. But still, it's dangerous compared to going to even Manhattan for the weekend. You know?
Well, that woman who lost her husband in the lake, that's half in the United States and
Yeah,
half
he was
in
on a
Mexico.
jet ski and they
Yeah.
shot him from a boat or something.
That goes to prove, like you're saying, how dangerous it is.
And that guy, talk about the unluckiest guy in the world. Because what are the chances they're gonna be able to hit you with a hunting rifle from a moving boat when you're on a jet ski? What are the chances you're gonna go just far enough over the border? I guess he didn't even know he was over the border, he was just jet skiing. So probably 5,000 Americans have jet skied on that lake in this last 6 months and nobody even saw a bad guy. He just happened to be wrong place at the wrong time. But, you know, the place still, people that have read the book have said my depiction of Mexico was like the best part of the book because I go into small towns and talk about what they're like, what the people are like.
So it's illegal, it's against the law to hitchhike in New York?
In New York,
The
yeah.
state?
Yeah.
The whole state?
So basically,
How
what-
long has that been in effect?
Probably like 20 years, who knows?
Really?
It's been 25 years since I hitchhiked in New York, but,
I know that it is just a thing of the past because
yeah, it's just
it was so common.
sketchy, yeah, it was, used to be very common, but one of the things that the Officer Greer told me was, it's not just a fine where you could go back to Massachusetts, write a check and send the $200, you gotta go to court. It's a summons, so you'd have to come back. So they would release me with a summons, and I'd have to make another trip just to go to court and pay, and get a lecture, and then go back to Massachusetts. So they gave me a break, because they were like, not only, first they were gonna just let me, they were like, oh, okay, he seems like he's done this before. They were gonna just let me keep hitchhiking. So the sergeant said, I could let you keep hitchhiking, but the state police might see you at the next exit, and then you'll get the $200 fine. So if you meet somebody who's having a bad day, if you meet a cop, a sheriff, or a state trooper who's having a bad day, he's just gonna lock you up for the day and give you the fine, the summons. We can do better than that, we'll give you a ride. And I was like, oh, that'll be in the book, that's cool.
So that's the only hitchhiking you did in this period of time?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a
Right.
pain in the ass.
Yeah.
And I didn't wanna do it.
Just a
after
few,
that.
yeah. But years ago it was a different story.
Oh, yeah, I used to do it
yeah.
constantly. We were talking about it before I started speaking about hitchhiking across country with 10 cents in your pocket, right? It's like, you knew you would meet someone that would buy you a sandwich and you would tell them a story or play them a song on your guitar or whatever, and everybody got along. I mean, I used to hitchhike routinely 800 and something miles in the winter from Wolfville, Nova Scotia to Methuen, back and forth. And my dad used to drive me to the edge of 213 to hitchhike back in March. Like, he wasn't afraid. I wouldn't let my kid go to the end of the street by himself. He's 16 and we live in Methuen. It's not like we live in, Philly. But I still don't let my kid walk around at night by himself. I used to hitchhike overnight in rural Maine in the middle of nowhere.